So we're going to start this evening. Susan Cole is going to speak to us for around 5 minutes. So huge welcome, Susan. Thank you for your time. And if you'd like to begin, that would be great. Thank you.
Hello, thank you all so much for inviting me to speak. I work for the HIV information charity NAM AIDS-MAP, and I'm a member of the 4M network of mentor mothers. This year, we mark 40 years since the start of the first cases of AIDS were reported, the start of a global pandemic that has disproportionately affected women. Today, there are approximately 20 million women living with HIV. I am one of those women. I received my HIV diagnosis through a routine immigration test in the USA. It didn't cross my mind for a moment that it could come back as positive, but the doctor, barely able to look at me shuffling papers, said, "The good news is you don't have syphilis, but the bad news is you're HIV positive. Oh, and you have about 7 years to live." This was about 25 years ago. My children were 5 and 7 at the time. I didn't think that I would live to see them grow to be men, but I have, and I've had 2 more wonderful children born free of HIV. The reason that I'm alive today is because of the tremendous advances in science that has given us an arsenal of tools to tackle the HIV pandemic. Highly effective combination therapy means that HIV is no longer a death sentence. Many of us can expect to live as long as everyone else, and those of us on effective treatment cannot pass HIV on to our sexual partners. And HIV treatment also dramatically reduces the risk of passing HIV on to our babies. Despite these advances, women continue to bear the brunt of the HIV pandemic. We face intersecting forms of stigma, discrimination, and violence. Women with HIV are disproportionately affected by gender-based violence, and we've seen violence against women skyrocket during the COVID-19 pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic has shone a light on existing health inequalities, both between countries and also within them. Very much the case for Black women with HIV, even in rich countries like the USA and the UK. Often we face experiences of stigma, discrimination, and disadvantage in healthcare settings, places where we should feel safe. I run treatment information workshops for people of colour living with HIV for NAM AIDS-MAP, and the experiences shared with me, especially by Black women, is often shocking. Yesterday in a workshop, a woman with HIV who actually advocates for others herself shared with me that recently she went to see her GP to talk about coming off the antidepressants that he prescribed her. He told her that this was a terrible idea, that as a Black woman, she was more likely to have mental health problems. So if she came off antidepressants, there was a good chance that she could be sectioned and have her children taken away from her. This happened in Brighton very recently, supposedly one of our most progressive cities. Despite the experiences that we face, I must emphasize that we Black women with HIV are not passive, voiceless victims. We, like all people with HIV, must be at the center of any decisions about our lives. Our care and treatment must be person-centered. And please, no more tokenistic engagement with us. We need to be meaningfully involved at all stages of research, policy, and service design and evaluation. Nothing about us without us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan, and what a privilege to be able to listen to that. Thank you very much for that. Our next speaker, Sophie Strachan, is unable to join us this evening due to what I understand was a pretty urgent work commitment. So unfortunately, we won't be able to hear from Sophie. We will move on to Martha Talana, who is going to speak to us for again about 5 minutes. And once we reach the end of all our wonderful speakers, we will take some questions. So over to you, Martha. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having me and inviting me to this. I live in Zimbabwe. I'm a woman living with HIV and a member of Making Waves, an intersectional feminist collective of women working together for common aims of gender equality, gender-based violence, HIV, and sexual and reproductive rights, and for mutual exchange, collaboration, and amplification of the work done by networks and organizations led by women, girls, and gender-diverse people everywhere. What I'm going to present to you is share a few things about how women outside of the UK have been affected by HIV. Women living with HIV, yes, they are more than 50% across Africa, and it's almost the same in all the African countries, that they are about 52 to 55% of the population of people living with HIV. Some of the things that we find is that sometimes we are invisible, even though there are many in terms of numbers. We seem to be invisible in terms of what we get, in terms of services. The work that we do is not supported. We have to do voluntary work. Our organizations are not supported. We face a lot of violence, violence in the home, violence in the community, violence in with the service providers, and also a denial of justice. Yes, some people do get justice, but for many people, justice is not attainable. And sometimes even when you get to where justice is supposed to be served, you do not really get it because information and support is not readily available. We also find that women are constrained by issues around the access to health services themselves, in terms of the distance, in terms of the costs of transport, and also in terms of the infrastructure itself. That, for example, in Zimbabwe, we do not have a properly organized public transport system, so people have to depend on private transport. And sometimes you are carrying babies, you have other children, and really people are not patient with you. And that is if you have the money at all to get to the health facility. When you get to the health facility, staffing is very constrained, and sometimes you face violence again, probably because they are also underpaid. They also don't have enough equipment, enough tools for the trade. In terms of when we also look at diagnostics, we are just seen as a diagnosis, an HIV diagnosis. Adhere to your ARVs, just ARVs, and then you have your viral load is undetectable, you are fine. Last week, I asked the nurse who was attending to me at the HIV clinic, I do have these other medicines that I'm taking for a very bad back, so they are quite strong. And I wondered, should you record them so that it's known by anyone who can. Then they said, no, we are not interested. And to me, that was a shock. So how do they link? How is I'm so this is where we say we are just seen as a statistic to tick the box. You are not seen as that human being who has these many needs. So in that way, women tend to be invisible that way. And also there are also a lot of things around sexual and reproductive health that are not taken into consideration. When also what I would also want to bring out is around women who lesbian, bisexual, or genderqueer, who are not really who are even more invisible than other women in terms of they are not even recognized. People, it's either they are not recognized or the recognition is around, a shout of shock and calling other people to come and hear this, come and see this, and it's really, it really removes a dignity from the person, and this also has an impact on the mental health, which is not really taken care of in the in the normal health system, but then we are getting traumatized. You are already living a life of trauma, and you get to where you need to get help, and then you are re-traumatized by those who are supposed to give you support. You are re-traumatized by those who are supposed to protect you. So in the end, you are left so vulnerable. And I'll also repeat what Susan has said, to say really it should be nothing about us without us. We really need to be considered, and also to be heard and to be visible. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Martha. And again, I think we're really fortunate that you've been able to find time to come this evening and to speak to us. We will now hear from Judy Otti, who is again going to speak to us for around 5 minutes. So over to you, Judy, and thank you.
Thank you so much, and good evening, everybody. And I will speak on behalf of the Sphere Forum. I did have a conversation with Sophie, so she will be represented, not to worry. And the issue that I would like to bring to the forefront is the lack of research for women in HIV, in HIV services, a lack of women being involved, or women's experiences being involved in research, or even in aging with HIV. The Sophia Forum has worked on issues around women aging with HIV in the last couple of years, and has done some pieces of work that are on our website that focus on this type of group. The We Are Still Here report is accessible on our website, that highlights the lack of involvement of women in research. And as women are now aging with HIV, there is a huge gap in knowledge of experiences of women as they age with HIV. We, as the Sophia Forum, have held workshops, which were the Wise Up group, which was focusing on menopause and the experiences of women living with menopause and HIV. And the advocacy ask was that women are more involved, and services are designed to incorporate the needs of women as they age with HIV. We find that there is a lack of research of the women's experiences. There's underrepresentation of women in research, ongoing research. Majority of the research is predominantly carried out in groups of men. And this then gives clinicians very limited information in the best care and treatment for women as they age with HIV. There's a lack of prioritizing of given to women's experiences. Majority of research available majority of the research on women is focusing on HIV and pregnancy, and not necessarily the other aspects of a woman's experience as they live with HIV. So there is a need to have a better recruitment drive that is meaningful and accessible for women. It's not enough to say women do not come onto these the trials, or women do not engage. I think we need to reflect on what the barriers are, there's a quote from a clinician who did research involving women and said what she found was that the barriers were mainly cultural and institutional, based on real cohesive perspectives, and not necessarily because women didn't want to engage. Women do want to engage. I think going forward, what would be helpful is to consider meaningful engagement with women. How do you support them through the recruitment process, whether it's childcare, whether it's other care responsibilities that women hold in society, and how do you support them through that? And also through the whole process in terms of co-production with the research design, the data collection, the analysis, and keep them informed even at the end of the research in terms of the outcome, so that there is a meaningful process both for the researchers and clinicians and the women living with HIV. I think in short, what we are demanding for is equity in the cohorts of research that is done, so that the issues affecting women are considered, and therefore the services that need to be developed and provided are reflective of women aging with HIV. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Judy, and thank you for finding the time to come and speak to us tonight. There is so much in what you just explained to us that I didn't understand, so really valuable. Thank you for that. We now move to Jackie Richardson, please. Over to you, Jackie.
Thanks, Holly, for the introduction. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here and hear the many different but similar experiences of women impacted by HIV across the UK and much broader, which I wasn't quite expecting. It's a great space for sharing ideas, and there are lots of similarities in what people have already been saying, so I'm not going to rehearse those. I'm going to kind of focus on highlighting some of the issues that we're experiencing in Northern Ireland. So just by way of a quick introduction to tell you a bit about Positive Life, we're Northern Ireland's only organisation dedicated to supporting anyone affected by HIV. While we're based in Belfast, we have a distinct reach across Northern Ireland, and we take, if you like, a three-track approach to the work that we do. So we have a wide range of direct services, education and awareness raising, and lobbying to influence policy. And in recent years, we've been working really hard and established ourselves as the lead voice within the community and voluntary sector on HIV and sexual health support services. So it is great to be invited to provide the Northern Ireland perspective, and I have two key areas just that I want to talk about briefly within the 5 minutes, although I could bang on for hours. So there's the current situation and what needs to be done. So whilst our numbers in Northern Ireland are comparatively small compared to the rest of the UK and indeed globally, over the last 5 years we have seen the level of new cases remaining steady for women. And in 2019 we saw 69,000 HIV tests carried out, of which around a third of them were performed as part of the antenatal screening programme. So that's a significant proportion of the tests. Whilst we know that women make up approximately a third of the new cases in Northern Ireland, we struggle with the historic notion that HIV is something which only affects men who have sex with men. So we very much share that experience of feeling invisible. And that's not helped by the fact that we don't have a sexual health strategy or a framework in place in Northern Ireland to update or modernise how HIV is viewed. And as far as I'm aware, I think we're the only region in the UK who doesn't have a strategy in place. Consequently, it remains for Positive Life to lead on tackling the misconceptions around who is affected by HIV, something which we very strongly feel should be invested in by our Department of Health. We are very proactive in our educational efforts and raising awareness campaigns and myth busting, and all of that, as I said, runs alongside our wraparound day-to-day psychosocial services, and we provide a whole range of talk and therapies, counselling, peer support, information and social services. From our perspective, a significant amount of women service users don't feel that their needs are being properly considered and factored into the Northern Ireland approach to sexual health. And for us, there are three key areas which underpin the needs of women affected by HIV in Northern Ireland. There's a lot of talk at the minute around transformation of healthcare in Northern Ireland, the need for a holistic right time, right place, right services approach. We have a mental health strategy with significant amounts of investment, and quite rightly so. And there are numerous strategies around a whole plethora of other health conditions, other physical health conditions. However, a sexual health strategy is conspicuous by its absence. And I would continually argue that that is 1/3 of our overall well-being and every bit as important as mental and physical health. And the lack of action or interest in sexual health from our department is very, very clear. And this represents a huge disservice to women and girls impacted or potentially impacted by HIV. As the only dedicated HIV service outside the clinical setting, we're the only support option for onward referral, but unfortunately that doesn't translate into appropriate consultation or investment either. And indeed we anticipate that our core grant is to be removed in the next financial year, and that, coupled with the ongoing challenges we have around attracting supporters and sponsors, is going to leave us in a very challenging position. The testing procedure in Northern Ireland is very clinic bound and is dictated by perception. So unless you present to the clinician as a stereotypical man who has sex with other men or a gay man, generally speaking, you won't be offered a test. We believe that testing is an essential part of the service provision and should be part of the wider process. I'm aware of the rollout of universal opt-out HIV testing in sexual health services in other parts of the UK, and that's an example of the effective way to dramatically decrease testing amongst women. And just kind of summing up on a couple of points that some others have made, I also love Susan's notion of nothing about us without us. I think that is so important. And it also reminds me of a quote taken from one of our mums who lives with HIV and who recently told us that she doesn't live with HIV, it lives with her. She's the landlord and she makes the rules. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you for being here this evening and giving us that Northern Ireland perspective, and for those really powerful words you just said at the end when you spoke. Really valuable. Thank you for that. So we move now. We're keeping beautifully to time. I'm incredibly grateful because I'm terrible at timekeeping, as I told you earlier. We move now to hear Professor Yvonne Gillies, please. So over to you, Yvonne.
Thanks very much, Holly. And I really want to echo what the amazing women who've gone before me have said, and I don't want to try and duplicate, I want to try and add to what has been said already. So globally, 52% of the world's population living with HIV are women, and the new diagnoses are mainly in women aged 15 to 24 years of age. In the UK, we think of HIV as largely a male-dominant issue. There are 30,000 plus women living with HIV in the UK. And unlike Martha's description of services in Zimbabwe, we do have good public health services. So surely we should have the solution and we should be doing everything right. Well, I think the reality is we aren't, because women have been left behind. Susan clearly demonstrated that there remains ignorance among non-HIV healthcare providers, even in areas where we work really hard in Brighton to educate our GPs about HIV. There still are major knowledge gaps. And this is largely because I don't think there has been adequate focus on research. Now, I know Judy has spoken very eloquently about this with regards to the Sophia Forum. But having worked in the HIV field for 25 years, I was really driven to found a charity called SWIFT, Supporting Women Living with HIV Information Network, because we do not have enough information about women living with HIV. And this charity has a steering group consisting of women living with HIV and HIV-interested physicians and academics who recognise there is a problem and we want to try to do something to fix that. There is this historical thought that women cannot be recruited to clinical trials. The PRIME study has 900 women living with HIV in the UK of perimenopausal age who have been successfully researched about menopause. Why? Because it was a trial that involved women living with HIV and is relevant to those women and involved women in the study design, the questionnaires, and the presentation of those results and knowledge dissemination. This is how it should be. Clinical trials have historically left women behind because of thalidomide, which was in the 1960s, which was never clinically trialed. And so there is this belief that women cannot safely participate in clinical trials. And this persisted even during COVID, when pregnant women were left behind in clinical trials. And this is not just HIV, it's all clinical trials, and it needs to stop. Women are not just bearers of children. Women have health needs, and they need to be involved in trials, both pharmacological, but also other trials, so qualitative trials, not just focused on drugs. There are many issues affecting women's quality of life, and therefore we really need to work hard to address this. So it feels sometimes like there's the same group of us, as Susan said, saying the same things to the same people. I am involved in a European AIDS Clinical Society conference next month, and I'm being asked to speak again on women's involvement in clinical trials. And one of my junior doctors, Sonia Rafe, is doing a presentation on a systematic review on the knowledge that we have on women living with HIV and the comorbidities, so the other conditions that can affect them. And I'm not going to steal her thunder, you need to tune in to watch it, but it shows so clearly that despite knowing there are research gaps, nothing is being done to close those research gaps adequately. So the health inequalities that women face in HIV and sexual health unfortunately persist, and we need a larger group of people to try and change this. So that's people outside of the HIV world, people who are not women living with HIV, or physicians specifically interested. We need general interest in this so that we can bring women with HIV into the 21st century. It is essential. We need to stop talking about it, as Susan has said. We need to actually make changes. And I really welcome this opportunity tonight, Holly, to be able to discuss this in a forum that is new. And hopefully we can perhaps as a group try to make a difference.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. You're absolutely right. There's been some really wonderful speakers here tonight, and we're incredibly fortunate actually to be able to hear all of you, and now to have the opportunity to ask all of you some questions. So we move to the part of our meeting this evening where there is an opportunity. I can see we do have quite a lot of people on the call this evening who have been listening to you speak, and they now have the opportunity, if they would like to ask some questions. Mark is much cleverer than me, so he can probably tell if anyone's got their hand up. I'm a bit of a technophobe, so I'm going to try and work that out. You just bear with me if you'd be kind enough. Well, I'll let Mark have a look, and if I may, I will be very cheeky and use my chairperson role to come in first and ask a question, if that's okay. A word that I've heard said many times this evening is invisible, which is just incredibly sad and moving to hear, actually, as someone who's quite new to the APPG, and I'm one of the deputy chairs. I wonder if all of you or some of you would like to speak a little bit more about what you think those real core underlying big serious reasons are, why we are still in 2021 using that word invisible about women, who have HIV. And would anybody like to come in on that? Parminder, did you want to ask a question, or did you want to answer my question, or perhaps both?
Hi, hello,
Hi.
thank you for asking. Well, actually, I wanted to build on your question. My question was very similar. I wasn't going to use the word around invisibility, but I did want to ask the question, and I'm curious to understand a bit more about what the panel's view is. Given that we're 4 decades into this epidemic, women have been disproportionately impacted by HIV right from the beginning. It's not new. The graphs aren't new. The data sets aren't new. In the UK, 79% of women accessing HIV care are Black and brown. It makes me incredibly angry when I hear that in 9 years' time, we're talking about our goal is to end all HIV transmissions. And I think that's fantastic, and I hope and pray that we can get there, and I think we've got every chance to get there. But I, like you, Holly, am thinking, why are we still having the same conversation that we were having back in the 90s? And I really want to hear from the panel about what they attribute that to.
Holly, can I maybe start?
Absolutely, and thank you, Parminder, for putting that in far more eloquent terms than I did. I'm very, very grateful to you for that. Yvonne?
I think the bottom line is stigma. I think HIV stigma has really crippled the ability of people with HIV to move on, because the stigma is coming from outside, from other people, and that's people on the street, it's healthcare providers, it's family, but there's also internalized stigma. So that stigma is coming from within and what people feel about their HIV diagnosis. And so Martha was talking about the re-traumatization of having an HIV diagnosis. And I don't think that has ever been properly considered to the point where we have been able as a group interested in HIV to overcome that, because we're not the ones creating the stigma is out there, and we need people to change how they are thinking about people with HIV. Then there is this thought that HIV is over, we have the drugs, they work. Yes, but you have to take the drugs every day for the rest of your life, and even taking those drugs can still be a reminder every day or re-traumatization for HIV. And there's no other illness that has quite the same, I think, weight attached to it. Somebody once made a comment, well, it's just like diabetes now, HIV, isn't it? It's a chronic illness. It's like, well, nobody ever says that to somebody with diabetes when they're diagnosed. Oh, it's just like HIV, it's a chronic illness. And I think no matter how much we think HIV is being really well managed, there's this major thing, and I think the others on the panel will speak more to this than me, more eloquently, but stigma for me is the big stumbling block that has stopped, that has made us stay where we are now, as opposed to moving on over the time that Parminder has shown us.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Just add to that from a Northern Ireland perspective. And just to add to it that, you know, in Northern Ireland, our understanding around HIV is a good 10 or 15 years behind the rest of the UK. And as I said in my opening kind of remarks, there is still a very pervasive perception that this is a condition that affects men who have sex with men, and without that information being updated in an appropriate way, that therefore is not going to change. And so that's for us, our service users would tell us that is where they become invisible, because they are never perceived as somebody who could be affected by HIV. So for us, it's not just about the stigma, it's about still the misinformation that's out there around it.
Thank you. If I could jump in, I agree absolutely with both what you've both said. I think stigma does play a terrible role and affects women in so many different ways. And also it's our life is dangerous. I've heard of cases where women, when we've spoken up about our HIV status, experiencing violence from partners. I hear many women who stay in abusive relationships because their partners say to them that no other man is going to want you if you have HIV. So there's so many different layers to this. But also, I think we need to consider an issue that Parminder raised, particularly around the issue that women of colour are disproportionately affected by HIV. And I think so much of that comes from this idea that we're somehow hard to reach. You know, it's not that we're hard to reach, it's just that healthcare professionals and the system isn't reaching us effectively. Until we address that, we're not going to be able to fix the system.
Thank you, Susan. And I can see James has his hand up and Anna. And I'm going to go to Martha next, because I think Martha perhaps wants to speak to this question, and then I'll come to James and to Anna. Thank you. And Judy, I can see your hand up too. If Martha would like to speak, and then Judy, and then I will come to James and Anna. Thank you.
Thank you very much. From where I sit, we find that there's a lot of fixation on slogans and these very nice, catchy things that sound nice in conferences and workshops, which do not at all translate to what is happening in our lived realities. And this is where we need, this week actually, I was commenting to someone to say this, they were asked, why is this happening over some other issues that are happening that, you know, someone says their story and I said, please, let's get this leave no one behind a slogan. Let's take it out of the PowerPoint presentations and the workshops and get it out there into the communities, to the individuals where it matters most. And I think for me, this is where I find the disconnect. There are these nice things being said by people in high places, but doesn't mean anything for me who has to wake up at 3 a.m. to get to the borehole so that I have water for the day. So, you know, some of those basic things that I have to live my day-to-day life are not really connected to what the elite are saying. Thank you.
Thank you, Martha. Judy?
Thank you, and mine will also be really brief. I think in addition to everything that's been said, there's a real lack of prioritizing of women's issues, women's needs, women's experiences. There is just a lack of prioritizing and involvement. And for me, once that is put in as a priority, all the other things will be considered. And this has not just happened in HIV, just like Dr. Galinis has said, even in the vaccination of exercise again, you know, so the prioritizing of women really needs to take forefront.
Thank you, everyone. As a politician, we sometimes don't give a straight answer to a straight question, and all of you have just given very clear, real answers to that question, and it is so helpful. So thank you for doing that. James, your question.
Thank you, Holly. Great event so far. Brilliant to listen to all the presentations and discussing them so far. My name's James. I'm the Senior Advocacy Advisor at Stop AIDS. I was at the Conservative Party conference a couple of weeks ago, and I was encouraged to hear new Foreign Secretary Liz Truss speak to her priority of using UK AIDS to advance the rights of women and girls going forward, and also in the FCD policies. So I'm hopeful that the new Foreign Secretary will see the connections between women and girls, and obviously the vast inequalities we're seeing right now in the HIV response with a global focus. So my question to the panel is, given the new priorities of the new Foreign Secretary, what changes would you want to see in the UK government's funding for international development programs and also potential changes in the upcoming spending review as well too. And if you wanted to share any reflections on this too, Holly, it would be interesting to get your thoughts on this as well. Thank you.
Thanks very much, James.
Thank you.
If I could answer, I think it's tremendous that the Global Fund has saved 44 million lives since being formed 20 years ago, and over 3 million lives have been saved by UK aid. However, the COVID pandemic has had a devastating impact on HIV prevention and testing, and we've seen devastating cuts to funding. UNAIDS funding has been cut by over 80%. I recently spoke with Winnie Byanyima, the executive director of UNAIDS, and she was saying that essentially lives are going to be lost by these cuts. So I would say, I would call on the government, if they are serious about the lives of women living with HIV, that we must continue to be funding these vital services. We won't just see the progress being stalled, we'll see us going backwards, and we're not going to be able to end AIDS until we end inequalities, and we need adequate funding to be able to do that.
Judy, I think your hand's up. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan, for putting that really well put. And I think to add to that, with the adequate funding, we've got to prioritize small community groups, so small community organizations that have specialistic knowledge, especially working with women, because a lot of times this funding goes to big organizations that don't have the specialisms or expertise or relationships with these groups of women.
And Yvonne?
So I would add to that. I mean, taking away funding, you know, from a group of women, 15 to 24-year-old women living in sub-Saharan Africa at highest risk of HIV acquisition, a really vulnerable group of women with so many social inequalities that we have no concept of really to the same extent in the UK. We really need to work hard to protect them. So as Susan has said and Judy have said, it's about HIV testing, but also HIV prevention, now that there are good forms of HIV prevention that are suitable for these women. But also we know that peer mentoring can work really well in younger women. So talking to women about negotiating safe sex, about avoiding risk taking, about staying in education or trying to get into education, all of these things are hugely important, as well as medical approach with HIV testing and prevention. You know, that peer support is really valuable, and we need to have that holistic approach to try and reduce further HIV acquisition in women worldwide.
Thank you, Yvonne, and thank you to everyone who answered that question. I suppose my reflection, and James, you're absolutely right to ask this question. It's an incredibly important question, and my commitment as a backbencher and someone who isn't a member of the government is to continue to learn, and this evening has been an incredible learning curve for me, and I know it will have been for many others on the call. So thank you for asking that question and for allowing us to hear those answers. And we move now to Anna, who has their hand up.
Hi, good night, everyone. I'm Ana Oliveira, I'm Portuguese, living in UK for 16 years. I've been diagnosed with HIV almost 3 years ago, and I work in the medical field, and I've got a lot of information about HIV. I never looked any different to any person living with HIV. Unfortunately, when I was diagnosed, just after 2 hours of being diagnosed, the second nurse who saw me, she just had a very negative comment that it sat with me up until I think I'll live with that all my life. And I never stigmatized no one about their condition. And unfortunately, that comment made me get this internal stigma. And from being a person that always understood HIV and AIDS, I became very stigmatized, ashamed, of my diagnosis, and I was depressed. So my question is how can you be visible if the first stigma we can get is from the healthcare professionals who were supposed to help us? And it took me almost 2 years and a half, I could say, just to be open, to be visible, and just to be here to try to do something to fight the stigma around HIV. So there's lots to be done, but I think we should educate health professionals. And I don't know if someone would like to comment on that, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question, Anna. Would a panel member like to speak to that question?
I'd just like to say, Anna, I'm really sorry you had that experience in the health system. I think it's so wrong, and it makes me so cross that we still have so much work to do to educate people about HIV. And I think this is why stigma cannot be underestimated. HIV doesn't kill. HIV stigma can kill more. And I think this is the whole thing, the impact that Anna clearly showed that it had on her life. People need to be aware of that. And I think trying to expand from a particular group of interested people into opt-out HIV testing, universal A&E testing, just making it a normal part of life where actually, it's not seen as anything other than another blood test that is being done, because it is a perfectly treatable condition that you will not transmit to somebody else if you are on treatment that's working. Zero transmission if you're on treatment. They're the messages we need to get out to people, but as many people as possible. And I guess, Holly, maybe you might have more to say about what forums could be offered as a result of this APPG that we could think of, so that Anna doesn't have to experience that again, or any other person being newly diagnosed.
Can I just add to that too, Holly? I'm really sorry, Anna, and that is an all too familiar experience that women have in Northern Ireland, and indeed some of our healthcare professionals, as a routine part of the conversation that they have with someone who's newly diagnosed, will warn them to be very careful who they tell, because this is a secret that once it's out there, you can't take it back. Which just adds so much to all of those layers of stigma that that we've been talking about, I think. And it's a very small part of what we're doing, but we have started a partnership with our School of Nursing and our medical schools here in Queen's, where we now go in and do a part of, contribute to the curriculum that is a part of their training. And we provide placements for medical students from all the different healthcare professionals. And in some small way, we hope that we're trying to address that alongside all of the other day-to-day stuff that we're doing in the lobbying and campaigning. So I hope we're doing something to make sure that somebody else doesn't experience what you experienced.
If I can come in, that's a very good point that you both made. I also think it's incredibly important that women are sufficiently empowered to call out when we experience this type of stigma, to know that it's our right to be treated with respect. We should not be experiencing stigma in healthcare settings, a place where we should feel safe, often at times when we're at our most vulnerable. So I would encourage all women who experience this to speak up and to complain and to take action, because this is completely unacceptable. And I think it's incredibly important that women are informed and empowered to know their rights and to know that this is unacceptable and should not be tolerated.
Thank you, Anna, for sharing that experience. Really, really important. I'm so pleased that you're able to do that. Thank you for doing that. And I can see we do have one more person with their hand up, and that person is David. Do you have a question, David?
Hi there. Thanks so much, Holly. I'm David Evans. I'm Professor in Sexualities and Genders at the University of Greenwich. Anna, I'm so sorry to hear your story, but I can assure you that right across our 4 branches of nursing, so that's children's, adult, mental health and learning disabilities, and across paramedic science, they get HIV education right throughout their whole 3-year programme now. And usually whenever we're starting off the HIV education with them, and it's different on each course, so it's customised to their specific courses, and for the midwives as well, we always start off by asking the students what sort of experiences they've witnessed. And from what you've said now, we still hear that. And from what Susan was saying about getting women to speak up each time they do feel the prejudice, another good message is to ask them to look out for allies who can stand up for them if they feel that their voice won't be heard or if they're too frightened to share their voice. So even looking for allies and support for other people that can stand up and challenge every bit of this stigma. Thank you so much. And I'm sorry that you've experienced that, Anna.
Thank you, David. I'm really pleased that you're able to join us and speak to that question. We are, sorry, did somebody want to come in? No? We are coming to the end of our time. It's gone incredibly quickly. There will be an opportunity for others who weren't able to join us on the call this evening to watch and to listen back to the things that we've discussed tonight, and I know amongst those will be members of the Lords and parliamentarians and people who have an interest, of course. I wonder if we can finish by each of the panel members perhaps answering the question on what single one thing you would want those of us who are here this evening and those of us who watch at a later date to take away from this discussion that we have that we've had on women and HIV. Thank you for that. And shall I tell you what I'll do? I'll go around in the same order that we spoke in, and we all know where we are then, and ask you if you can to give us an answer to that question. Thank you. So we go first to Susan.
Hi, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I would like to emphasise that we cannot end AIDS until we end inequalities, and one of the most important things that can happen now is for adequate funding to ensure that we're able to keep up the fight.
And we go to Martha, please.
Thank you very much. My issue is around looking back at the history, particularly in the region where I come from. Communities, especially women, were actually central and leading in terms of the response to HIV. They still provide that role. They need support, they need funding at the level where they are, at the grassroots in the communities that they are. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. And we move to Jackie, please.
So I suppose my key ask rolls all of the above stuff that I've talked about into one. So I'm going to cheat and give you maybe 2 or 3. So I'd like to see a sexual health strategy for Northern Ireland that includes a consistent approach to relationship and sexuality education in schools and elsewhere as appropriate, and that there's investment in the strategy to resource it properly and to resource services, and that normalises and takes a holistic and properly informed approach to sexual health screening for women so that Anna's experience isn't repeated again and again and again.
Thank you, Jackie. Yvonne?
So I would like to say that HIV is not over. There are many women being affected by HIV who are not being included in current health and research strategies, and we need to break that cycle now.
Thank you so much. And unfortunately, that brings us to the end of our time. I've been sitting here, as I'm sure other people have, with my pen, writing lots of notes, several pages, and I'll go away and digest some of that after this meeting finishes. It's just been so interesting and so valuable, and I feel really privileged actually to have been able to chair this event this evening and to listen to everything that's been said. And I've drawn lots of circles around one phrase in particular that so many of you have mentioned, and that's nothing about us without us. Such a powerful sentence that I know will stay with me as we go on to have more discussions. So a huge thank you to everyone who attended, and a huge thank you to all of our panel members for your time and for sharing your knowledge with us and your experiences. And I very much hope we will all meet again. Thank you very much indeed, and have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you, Holly.